Hi, I am Trixie Paprika, a company member with Novelties Theater, and I am here with the delightful Bibi Sanchez. Bibi, who is a biracial feminist queer performer who has also been known to be a geek and fangirl. Bibi also writes erotica as well as performs and occasionally produces burlesque. So, welcome, Bibi.
Hello, good to see you.
Yes, we are delighted to have you. So you brought to us the faceless old woman that secretly lives in your home, a Welcome to Night Vale novel, which I had heard of Night Vale, but I have never heard the show or read anything. And this definitely made me want to get started because it is
Thanks.
weird and interesting, and I'm delighted by it.
Awesome. My work here is done.
Right. Good job.
While there is a long history of books becoming plays and, later, films, the history of visual media becoming a book is a relatively newer phenomenon. Novelizations of films and television episodes gained popularity in the 1960s and 1970s, when the only way people could own a piece of visual media was to purchase a book that turned the visual elements into narrative ones. Film historian Grady Hendrix argues that this practice really began in the 17th century with book versions of popular plays that included illustrated inserts, a practice that continued well into the 19th century. But even though contemporary media properties love to hop from page to screen and back again, it remains much more rare for a podcast to become novelized. Created by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor, Welcome to Night Vale began as a bi-monthly podcast in 2012. In 2015, Fink and Cranor adapted the podcast into a novel of the same name. But rather than simply retelling the plot of the first 3 seasons of the show, the creators instead offered a new in-world narrative told from the point of view of minor characters in the series. 2 more Night Vale novels were released in 2017 and 2019, following less in the footsteps of novelization and more in the tradition of IP expansion.
So let's start with kind of the basic question. Why this book, both in general and why your excitement about the Night Vale stories?
Yeah, this is actually my second Night Vale act because I have gone down the rabbit hole with this show. And I love this character. I just, even when they first introduced her in the podcast, I just thought she was fascinating because the thing about Night Vale is it is in that kind of wheelhouse where things are kind of eerie and off, but not overtly scary. And I sort of love that. That is just an area that I don't think enough people really capture and really go after. And so that's one of the things that I just really have always loved about Night Vale is the sort of, it's almost like going to Twin Peaks or really Northern Exposure. It's like if Northern Exposure and Twin Peaks had a baby, like this would be that baby. So things that just seem like normal and everyday occurrences just have this slightly off quality about them. And she is one of those characters that really sticks out even in the podcast as that feeling. She's a feeling, right? We've all had that feeling of walking into a room or being in an older space and just having those hairs on the back of your neck stand up, that, that great feeling of seeing a picture moving with you, a painting where you're like, I could swear. Does anyone else see that? Am I the only one? Is that just for me? So I think there's that juicy quality about the character that I really liked. And then I loved that they took her as this side character and she started getting more and more airtime as the podcast progresses. And then it started to really become intriguing of like, there's a backstory here. This isn't just a feeling now. There's some things going on. When they had her run for city council, it was like, how do you have a faceless old woman who secretly lives in your home running against a dragon for city council? And it's So it just was, so when they decided to then take it to the next level and write the novel about her, I was like, I have to get this. I have to. And I had not read their previous novels. They've written several for the podcast. And this was the first time that I was like, okay, I have to know. I have to read this. And I've heard that this is one of the ones that they're the most proud of. They really like where they took the character and being able to come up with that backstory. So it just, so all of that.
That's great. I have to say the experience of reading it, knowing very little about Night Vale, other than that it lives in this sort of magical realism sort of world. Things start out really weird in the book, and then they kind of go back in time and it's very normal. Yeah. And then it slowly gets weird again. And I feel like that was a really interesting experience to go, wait, the first chapter was really weird. Why do we just have like historical fiction now? And then it kept going and it sort of all knit together. So it was pretty exciting.
Yeah, I did. I thought that was really an interesting choice to make, to jump back and forth between sort of the contemporary times that the Night Vale listeners would be familiar with, but then jumping back into the past and discovering all the adventures. And there's a lot of adventures.
A lot of adventures, exactly. So you really obviously focused in on the character of the faceless old woman for your act. And it is such a striking beginning to the act. And I actually think that why don't we take a minute and watch the act, because I think most of the things that I want to talk about will make more sense once I've seen it. So let's take a look. Okay, so we have just seen all of that happen. And if you haven't even read the book, I feel like you have this tangible sense of this presence, like you were describing, from this character, the half black and half white face, and the sort of like the way that your hands went towards the camera gave me chills in like a creepy and exciting way. I hope that's what you were going for. But I want to start at the very beginning. Tell me about the masks because they are so interesting, and I was not expecting two, and then I was also not expecting the full face makeup after that. So tell me about that and where they came from.
Yeah, well, it was interesting when you have to think about, well, what does faceless really mean? And I went back and looked at a ton of fan art because, you know, in typical nerd fashion, that's what we do. We go to Tumblr. Bless them. And I was like, how are other people seeing this character? Because I was just really curious on how to try to capture that. What does faceless really mean? And there was some really interesting interpretations. And so I wanted to, there was the option of just sort of making it a black hole. And there was the option of you know, going real CGI with it and just kind of making something else happen. I mean, not that my tech skills, let's start there. In theory, someone could have imagined that. But I wanted this act to be able to have an opportunity to live outside the film world. And so in the new times, since we're in the, you know, there was the before times, the panorama, and then the new times. And so in the new times, this act could eventually come back to a stage. Mm-hmm. Now, stages, everyone, were no. So,
okay.
Anyway, so I wanted to be able to capture it something with a physical quality, and so I have played off and on with masks, making them, sometimes performing with them, but definitely I had my actual undergrad thesis was art. And so I made masks. And so I have had an affinity for mask and mask making for a long time. And I wanted to capture something that was still colorful because she has such a colorful life. And I hated the idea of her being a total void. And there are these moments in the book and in the podcast where she kind of reveals herself, that idea of like, I'm there. You think I don't have a face, but I have something. You just don't want to see it. And I sort of loved that to kind of draw from. And so I created the two different images, and I wasn't sure if I was going to create two different masks either, but I created both of them in two different looks. And I was like, you know, actually, I kind of really like both of the ways that they turned out. And I sort of loved the idea of a double reveal to get to the actual face. And so that was kind of why I ended up with the two masks. But the colors and the representation, because one is really almost like pixelated. I wanted it to be broad brush strokes that sort of create face, right? It's one of those things like where if you repeat an image enough times, you can actually create, when you use the color palette to create something else. And so I wanted to take that kind of idea of taking this very pixelated look, and that was one mask. And then the other one has that more like face melting quality, a little bit more of the horror, but again, in different colors, because I didn't want it to be in the grotesque, because I think that's the other charm, again, about Night Vale, is that they never really show and go there to the real gory stuff, because that's just not, and that's never been my thing. I like suspense and chills. I don't really like horror and gore. And so I wanted to sort of honor that about Night Vale and the creators and creating that kind of weird space. And so I wanted to stay in the same color palette, but then create the sort of half melting traditional mask look. And then I was like, well, then what do I do with my face? And so I thought about taking the same color palette and doing something. And then I was like, well, I could see the colors revealing to then sort of a more blank void. And when I found an image where someone really did a neat half and half, I was like, okay, that starts to read like something to me, because it does help obscure my facial features enough without being too distracting.
Mhm.
And so
That's
I
so
thought,
true because it what my eye rests on is the line rather than the facial features that it crosses, which is so interesting.
and it's
Something that I saw in the mask reveal was also just this character who seemed to have so many different selves throughout her life. And so it's almost like you got to see each of them and then this reality that where she is this faceless old woman that she spends most of her time as that. So that was really fascinating. So my next question is actually going to jump to the end of the act with this quote that you end with, because I feel like it's relevant to this sense of void or like people don't see what she doesn't want them to see or they don't want to see. And I'll just read the quote. There is power in being unremembered, in being overlooked. You should remember that power. People who aren't seen can see and hear all. Which is so fascinating. And I'd love if you could discuss a little bit of what about the quote inspired the act and what do you take away from that?
yeah, it's actually interesting because it wasn't like the root, like I didn't use it as the jumping off point for the act. But
Mm.
when I went back to go look through the materials again, the quote really stood out. And so then I was like, okay, actually this would make a nice coda to the piece and sort of give it that little finish at the end. And I think to me, it's sort of multi-leveled. And I think, especially as a performer who is older, in her 40s, and being through the pandemic and having to sort of embrace a lot of different things about one's mortality. um, Including really basic, silly stuff like not going to a hairdresser and having to live with your natural hair color, and really sort of being with that and not feeling a need to put on a bunch of makeup for things, and really like sort of embracing all of the things about yourself that maybe we are quick to modify and change when we are being seen out on stage, especially. We're all very artful on what we make solid choices. Like, what is this for this character? Or what is this for me when I'm in like an MC and it's like more of the me, even though it's still not me.
The persona rather than
The persona. And so we have all of these different layers to ourselves. And so I just really sort of kind of focusing and really thinking about age and the idea of why I haven't just gone completely silver, and why I haven't made that choice, and why a lot of other performers my age don't make that choice. And sort of it just really was reminiscent of what it means to be an aging woman in America to me, because this isn't necessarily the same struggle that other cultures put on their women as they get older. And so part of it was just sort of a statement on aging, and not just the act of, and then all the other ways that we are unseen. There's just a lot of people who get unseen in our culture, specifically just Americans, because that's my space. I'm not going to speak for everyone, but just in American culture, we often overlook, especially just the aging, anyone who's different. There's just all of those different ways that you can be unseen in our society. And so it just was really kind of a moment for me, going through everything that we've gone through, not just with the pandemic, but all of the different things going on in America right now, all of the different reasons to protest. It kind of hit that seeing the unseen, and just remembering that they may, people who may not be in dominant culture are viable people with backstories and these amazing tales to tell, and they do see and hear everything. We may be invisible to you, but you are not invisible to us.
That's really powerful. Yeah. So, I want to pivot a little bit and kind of talk about like how you engaged with the text itself. You said that you looked back at the material and found this quote that was really speaking to you. Were there particular aspects about the character that you pulled out? I mean, you talked about the general feeling of her, but were there particulars that you pulled out from the book, and how did you add those up to be what you wanted her to be?
Yeah, there was there's a repetition sequence that you see towards the end of the piece, and part of that was leaning into some of the things from her story, in that there is a part of her that's a nurturer. There's a part when you really focus on Craig and the sort of modern family members, that she's caring for them, that she wants them to succeed. You realize why later, how her motives are not pure at all. But in the moment, it's like oddly nurturing, and she makes strange choices to do it. It's one of those like being a parent, but without really understanding what parenting is, and so wanting them to do well. Like, I want you to do well. I want you to succeed in finding a partner and breeding and continuing your line. I want this for you. You're making stupid choices right now, and I don't know how to tell you that other than setting your clothes on fire, and and then closing all your accounts and having the bank have to work out your issues. Like, it's like I'm going to force you to grow up in a way that a regular parent would probably not make those choices.
Probably not.
But it comes from a place of wanting them to succeed. And so I thought it was just really interesting. And so I wanted to keep in that sort of sense of cradling. There's a lot of her being with the babies, and the fact that the babies all kind of know who she is. Like she is herself to them, and they see it in that weird way that babies sometimes freak you out. I think you can relate to this right now. Like, babies sometimes go into this place that you're like, what are you seeing or relating to right now? And why don't I see it too? And I wanted to kind of lean into that feeling with her and some of the movements. That's why there's some of the cradling and some sort of the sort of nurturing, moments, while also contrasting those with the sort of terrifying moments of, I'm going to be the last thing you see.
Absolutely.
It kind of reminds me in a weird way of that sort of Inigo Montoya thing. Like, I need to give my speech before I stab you.
She definitely monologues before she stabs, for sure. I need you to know why I'm here and what it's for.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue even that she lost out on her chance a couple of times because she needed to monologue about it.
Right. Well, I mean, they're classic. That's just
classic villain,
Classic villain move, though.
Exactly.
Like, no capes. And really, do we need the monologue? Come on, you guys. Exactly. Pull it together. Villain handbook. Items 1 and 2.
Right? Well, she is an unsuccessful villain, so that's why.
Right. And that also, I think, really sort of charmed me about this character, is that she wants to be a villain. She wants to do these things, but her own personal moral code won't let her cross certain lines. And I sort of love that too. Like, there's something really human about that, which I think is also a wonderful contrast to this character who is, rapidly becoming unhuman, but has this deep, deep humanity and this moral code that they just let drive all of their decisions.
Mm-hmm. Well, before I let you go, very important question. Have you ever encountered the faceless old woman? And do you think that she secretly lives in your house?
So I don't think that she secretly lives in this house, but I have encountered a similar feeling entity in my house growing up. There were definitely those, like, you knew not to go down the hallway at certain times of day. Like, there was that feeling that, it's like, okay, this is your time. I'll go back to my room. This is your time. I understand that. And then the other is in more contemporary times. I work in a 100-year-old theater space that is 100% haunted. There is no way that is not a haunted space. And almost all my coworkers would agree. Like, there's very few people who are like, no, not now that you mention it. And anyone who has to be in that space, like, it doesn't even have to be after dark, although after dark, I promise you, in that theater by yourself is a whole nother feeling. But even just being there like on a day like today where it's super sunny out and gorgeous, but the theater is dark and cool, and there's just this like back area that you can just feel that wall presence. And you just know. You can hear stuff, and you know, there's like all the rational things that you can come up with, but there's just that feeling.
No, it's that back of the neck feeling. I know exactly what you mean. That like I could explain this away, but not 100%.
Right. It's like, okay, someone's water heater maybe is contributing to a noise. Nothing is going to change that feeling in the air.
Exactly.
There's just that feeling in the air, and you just sort of feel it, and you kind of just, something tells you not to do something, and you're like, I don't need to open that door right in this moment.
Yes. I imagine that you listen to those feelings and are therefore kept safe.
Right. Yeah, I'm not the person in the horror movie who's like, there's funny noises downstairs, I'll go check, with just, a flashlight and my hopes and dreams. No, I'm the one that's like, the spunky kid who's got like the flashlight, the bike helmet, who's like put on his brother's like, umpire gear, and is like, all right, I'm going to go down there, but I'm,
like the hockey mask, you've got the like elbow pads, like I am ready for whatever is happening.
Well, like, but you're not getting me, because I'm.
But you know who survives? The kid in the like hockey gear, right? So yeah, I think that you're doing the right thing. Good job.
As a PSA, just remember. I'll learn something.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for chatting today, and for this beautiful piece of art. Viewers, if you have not yet read this book, I do highly recommend it. Like I said, I had never listened to Night Vale, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm probably going to go listen to Night Vale now, because it is exactly as BB has just been describing it. It is creepy, but not gory, and like fascinating and weird. And it just left me wanting to know more. So thank you for bringing it.
Thanks for having me. I love this series. I think this is a great idea.
Thanks for watching Ekphrasis, a production of Novelties Theater. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to make a tax-deductible donation through the link in the video description. And don't forget to like and subscribe below so you don't miss our next episode on Gothic heroines with Jacqueline Box.